Here are the solutions from the extension mock exam for trigonometry. Number 1, sketch a triangle with a cotangent of theta that is square root of 7 divided by 3. Find the secant of theta. Okay, so first of all, we need to know that the cotangent is the opposite or the reciprocal of tangent, which means it's adjacent over the opposite. We need to know that the secant is the reciprocal of cosine, which means it is the hypotenuse over adjacent. And the cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, which means it is the hypotenuse over opposite. Okay. So if you want a triangle with a cotangent of theta, that means that square root of 7 over 3 is actually the adjacent over the opposite. So let's draw that. We're going to draw a triangle with theta, and we're going to write down that the adjacent is square root of 7, and the opposite is 3. Okay, and so basically what we want is we want the secant of theta. And the secant of theta is the hypotenuse over the adjacent, and we don't know the hypotenuse, okay? So how do we figure out the hypotenuse from the adjacent and the opposite? Well, we'll use Pythagorean's theorem. So the hypotenuse is equal to, hypotenuse squared is equal to the square root of 7, which is the adjacent squared, plus the opposite squared. So that would be square root of 7 squared is 7. 3 squared is 9. So h squared is equal to 16. And so h is equal to 4. So if we want to say what the secant of theta is, the secant of theta is equal to the hypotenuse over the opposite, and the hypotenuse is 4, and the opposite is, the secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, which would be 4 over square root of 7. Okay? Number 2, consider the series below. It's got a summation from n equals 0 to 101 of 4n minus 2. Write out the first 3 terms of the series. Okay, so the way this works is you are going to take the indexes 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, all the way to 101. So it says to write out the first 3 terms of the sequence. And the first 3 terms would be n equals 0, n equals 1, and n equals 2. And so n equals 0 would be 4 times 0 minus 2. The second term would be 4 times 1 minus 2. And the third term would be 4 times 2 minus 2. And so the first one would be negative 2. The second one would be 2, and the third one would be 6, right? So I'm going to write the first 3 terms. It's going to be negative 2, 2, and 6. Since the first term is negative 2, we could say that u1 equals negative 2. Since the second term is 2, and the third term is 6, we can see that this is an arithmetic sequence, right? Because like each one of the numbers, each one of the terms is the same amount separated from the last one. So the step size between each pair of terms is the same number 4. So that's the definition of arithmetic sequence. So our d value, the common difference, is actually 4. So now we can use the u1 and the d value to start to figure out what would be the sum of all these terms here. By the way, how many terms are there? If you count from 0 to 101, is that 101 terms? Not quite. If you would count from 1 to 101, that would be 101 terms. If you count from 0 to 101 terms, you have 1 extra term, which is n equals 0, so you actually have 102 terms. So if you're counting from n equals 1, the total number of terms is 100, or if you count from n equals 1, the last term would be 102 for the index, okay? So we're going to use this sum here, which is the arithmetic series sum, And we know n, it's 102. We know u1, it's -2, and we know d, because it's 4. And so we can just substitute in n, u1, and d, and that will give us the sum of the first 102 terms. So we're going to have 102 divided by 2 times 2 times u1, -2, plus n minus 1, so that would be 102 minus 1 times d, which is 4. So that's equal to 51 times -4 plus 101 times 4. Oops, 101 times 4, not 100 times 4. Okay, so that's equal to 51 times -4 plus 404, which is equal to 51 times 400. Okay, 51 times 400 20,400. Okay, you don't even need the calculator for that, right? It's pretty easy multiplication. All right, number 3. All right, this is a trig problem. Remember that law of sines is core and law of cosines is extension. So let that be a hint to you as to what you're going to use for this problem. Okay. All right. First of all, you have Art, John, and Sung together at point A. John walks 120 due south. Due south means directly south from point A and reaches J. Okay. So we got everybody at this certain point. We have Art, John, and Sung all at this point A. And John is going to walk 120 directly south, and he's going to walk until he gets to point J. Now, from point A, Sung is going to face John, and then he's going to turn 110 degrees to the left. So he's going to turn 110 degrees left. It's going to be in that direction. And then he's going to walk 80 meters from A until he gets to point S. Okay, that's Sung. And Art's going to stay at point A. All right. So that makes a triangle. It's a non-right triangle because none of the angles are 90 degrees. Actually, this angle here happens to 110 degrees, right? And now what we're going to do is we are going to, after we drew the picture, we are going to find out how far point S is from point J to 1 decimal place, okay? So basically, we want to know this distance here, okay? So how do we figure out this distance? Okay, now remember, to use law of sines, you have to have an opposite pair of angle side known. And in this case, the only angle we know is 110, and we don't know the opposite side, so this is definitely not a law of sines problem. So that just leaves law of cosines. So let's see, can you use law of cosines to solve this problem? Well, with law of cosines, what you do is, you're going to take the formula which we have down here, okay? We're going to write it up there. We're going to have little c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine big C. Okay, so I'm going to write that here. Little c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine big C. Okay, we know what big C is. It has to be 110 degrees because that's the only angle we know. If this is big C, that means that x is little c. And that means that 120 and 80 have to be little a and little b. Okay, so that's what we're going to use here. So little c is going to be our x squared. Okay, so we'll just put x squared. A squared plus b squared would be 120 squared plus 80 squared. Minus 2ab would be minus 2 times 120 times 80. And that would all be times the cosine of big C. Big C is 110 degrees. Okay? Now, let's just put all this all in the calculator. Okay? First thing we're going to do is, since it's a trig problem, let's make sure we're in the right mode, degree mode. And since we're not, now we are, okay? We are going to do this operation here. So we'll do 120 squared plus 80 squared minus 2 times 80 times 120. Doesn't really matter if you do 120 first or 180 first, since we're just multiplying, times the cosine of 110 degrees. Since we put mode degrees, it knows that 110 is 110 degrees. And I get x squared equals 27367. 27367. And then we just need to take the square root of that to find out what x is. It's 165.4. We wanted to know one decimal place. Okay? So, that is the distance from Sung to John. Okay. Next part. Find how far north Sung is from Art to one decimal place. Okay, so actually Sung is not north of Art. Sung is actually northeast of Art, right? But let's do this. We're going to draw a little triangle here, a right triangle, which shows you how much north Sung is from Art and how much east Sung is from Art. And what we want to know is how much north he is from Art. Okay? So let's try to find y here. So we're going to redraw the triangle here. It's a right triangle this time. We have this being 80, and this angle here is related to 110 degrees. Since 110 degrees helps complete this angle to be 180 degrees, we know it's 180 minus 110, so we know that this angle here happens to be 70 degrees. Okay? And we want to know what y is. So what are we going to use to solve for y in this case? Okay, now since you're so used to doing law of cosines here, you might think, oh, I'm going to use law of cosines or something. But no. In this case, you don't need to because it's a right triangle, right? Since it's a right triangle, we could just use SOHCAHTOA. The question is, what do we need to use? So, ka, or toa? Well, based on this angle theta here, we want to know the adjacent, and we know the hypotenuse. Adjacent hypotenuse, that's ka, that's cosine, right? So we have the cosine of theta equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Our theta here is 70, so cosine of 70 degrees is equal to the adjacent, which is y, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 80. Then we can solve for y by multiplying 80 times both sides. 80 times the cosine of 70 degrees. So let's find out what that is. 80 times the cosine of 70 degrees. And the answer is 27.4. So the distance y is 27.4 meters. Okay? So that's how far north Sung is from Art. And that's it.